Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate for president in 2020, and these Green Socialist podcasts are about continuing to talk about the program we are advancing. And of course, today is 9/11, a day of remembrance. And the thing I'm remembering is that both parties that nominated me, the Green Party and the Socialist Party, issued statements right after 9/11 saying, don't use this as an excuse to go to war and occupy countries in the Middle East. This is an international crime against humanity. It requires prosecution and international cooperation to bring the perpetrators to justice. And instead of doing that, we went to war. And we still haven't had a trial of the people that actually did this. We do have one of them at Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, who's been going through hearings for a decade, going through hearings right now. The families who lost loved ones want a trial, so they find out exactly, who all was behind it. Maybe some Saudis were involved. A lot of the people that did the act were Saudis, and they got a lot of Saudis got flown right out of the country by the Bush administration. There are a lot of questions around that. So we still haven't had a trial to find out everything we ought to know about what happened and brought the people that did it to justice. So I think looking back, wasn't many people got it right, but the Green Party did, the Socialist Party did. And I think our statements were better than, say, Barbara Lee's, who just said, let's wait, hold up, not prosecute the perpetrators, not go to war. And of course, depends on whose estimates you look at. That study of the cost of the wars at Brown University puts it at $8 trillion. The National Priorities Project put it at $21 trillion. But imagine what we could have done with that money instead of running around the Middle East, killing hundreds of thousands of people, a lot of collateral damage. It still goes on. There's not much talk on cable news about the fact that that second drone strike we did after the service members from the United States and nearly 200 Afghans were blown up by a suicide bomber outside Karzai Airport. That second drone strike, we killed a family and a man who had worked with the U.S. For many years. And he was just bringing water back to his family. That's the kind of collateral damage that alienates people and creates more terrorists. Yet here we are, really not ending the war on terror, just putting it, quote unquote, over the horizon. And all this stuff will be done in secret, and we'll get more people angry with us because we're the war on terror that can't shoot straight. That's why Daniel Hale, they put him in prison, almost 4 years, just got sentenced. He was the Air Force intelligence analyst that blew the whistle on the fact that 90% of the people we were killing in Afghanistan were not Taliban or enemy combatants. They were civilians, which of course was pushing those people to oppose us and making things worse. So that's my reflections on 9/11, and I'm not sure this government has got the message. We just had Democrats in both armed services committees vote another about $25 billion for the Pentagon next year. Militarism hadn't skipped a beat with the Democrats in power, which is a whole another reason why we need the Green Party. Of course, the other big thing this week was Biden's vaccine mandates. And all I can say is about time. Kids are going back to school. We're losing 1,500 people a day. This is back into the kind of surge we had last winter. And it's hitting the children. We had over 250,000 children with COVID cases last week. And that's a quarter of all the COVID cases. And we're going back to school, and these damn Republican governors don't want masks. They don't want vaccines. They're a death cult. which is a real problem because the Democrats, aren't dealing with the people's needs. We've got the uh, unemployment benefit just ran out, the eviction moratorium just ran out. People are headed to homelessness and not being able to make ends meet. And that's the alternative to the death cult. Not a very good choice. So that's why we need another party. And I'll stop there and listen to your questions and comments. Amy L. Sachs. Hope HH will talk about the other 911 today, perpetrated by the U.S. against socialists abroad. Yes, of course, that is the coup in Chile that the United States orchestrated against the popular, what was it called? Popular Unidad. Anyway, it was a united front of the socialists, the communists, the radical party, which is really a capitalist party, and some other smaller capitalist parties. And they were trying to institute reforms in Chile to help the people, land reform, nationalization of the copper industry, providing more social provision for the people's needs. And the U.S., particularly with some of our companies like the copper industry, Anaconda Copper, and one of the telecoms from back in that day, I'm trying to remember which one, but they didn't want this socialistic government, and it was a moderate socialist government. When workers took over factories or farmers or peasants took over land from big landowners, government didn't always back them. So there was a struggle going on there. But Henry Kissinger said we can't let Chile go communist because of the stupidity of its own people. Of course, they voted for this government, and it's not stupid to have a government that takes care of the needs of the many instead of just a few. So that started on 9/11 back in 1973, and Pinochet came to power. I think he executed about 1,000 people on the left, including perhaps Allende, who may have committed suicide. We don't know for sure, as the army was, coming into his office, and rounded up tens of thousands of people, put them in prisons, and you had a very authoritarian government there for decades. And that is not unusual for U.S. foreign policy. Particularly, that was sort of the last one. We were behind the military takeover in Brazil back in '64. Famous quote from David Rockefeller is, "Now we can really do business." Same thing in Argentina, where the term disappeared, became a verb. We supported a lot of coups, and not just back then. Honduras, 2009, under the Obama administration, Haiti twice, and we're messing around now in Venezuela. None of our business. So that's the other 9/11, and we shouldn't forget it. Rob D. Rich, since never forget is trending, what part of American history is forgotten and never talked about, and you feel should be remembered and talked about? Well, there's a lot. And the part that they don't want us to talk about is the part that this death cult called the Republican Party wants us to forget about. They want us to not understand and acknowledge how this country was built on the dispossession of indigenous people, of the Mexicans, who were largely indigenous in the War of 1848, and the enslavement of African people. That is at the foundation of this country. And they just want to act like it never happened. And we aren't still suffering the consequences today. So I think that has to be part of history that students learn. And it's not just about what was wrong and bad about that, but it's about the people who fought against that. And we don't know enough about that history in particular. As the American Revolution unfolded, there was a lot of abolitionism. And they had a property qualification that the mechanics and artisans and laborers just ignored. in states like Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, they started going to the town meetings, even though formally they weren't entitled, but there were enough of them, they couldn't be ignored. So the pro-democracy element by the working people of that era is something we forget. I mean, there's some books out saying, the slave owners ended up winning the American Revolution and perpetuating slavery. And that's true when you get to the US Constitution, which was in a lot of ways a counter-revolution. But during the American Revolution, there was a democratic upsurge by people who, some of them believed that slavery should be abolished, that slaves should basically take over the plantations as reparations. Others believe that Indian nations, instead of being pushed westward and, basically an attempt to exterminate them, which was the predominant move by settlers, there were movements that saying, no, they should be part of the United States. The Cherokee, the Delaware, and other nations should become states of the United States. So there's a lot of history there that people need to understand, that while we had basically a settler colonial kind of development of this country, we also had freedom fighters from every quarter from the beginning until today. And that all needs to be part of what people study and understand and get their inspiration from. Annie Messick. Good afternoon, Mr. Hawkins. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on why the Green Party gets so much hate, where the Libertarian Party and others don't get that same level of vitriol that we do. Well, let's think about where it's coming from. Obviously, the hate from the Democratic Party is because they fear us. They know that our platform is more popular than their platform. What Angela Walker and I ran on, the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, an economic bill of rights, deep cuts in military spending and putting that money into social and environmental protections. Trump and Biden, Bush too, but that was older, they were against those programs. And you look at public opinion polling, our program was popular, majoritarian. So we get the hate from the Democrats because they know that we're a threat. I think that's where that comes from. Of course, on the left, there's always little sniping and, people trying to denigrate their rivals. And all I can say is, just organize your own thing. Don't spend your time running other people down, because that's not constructive. And then, of course, there's people on the right, the Republicans, the Libertarians, who believe in basically a deregulated capitalist kind of economy that we don't. So they hate us for that. So, there's a lot of sources of the hate, but there's also a lot of support. And I think there are lots of people out there, when they look at the Green platform, they say, yeah, that's what I want. The problem is our electoral system. It's winner take all from single member districts, which means you can't vote for what you want without maybe helping what you like least. And that's what we got to change. And if we can do that, it'll be a game changer. And I think that needs to be our top priority. With the Republicans creating a democracy crisis with respect to voting rights, even election certification, violently intimidating election workers, we got a real democracy crisis. But we can't let the Democrats off the hook, because they keep the Green Party off the ballot on purpose. Party suppression is a form of voter suppression. It's what authoritarians like Putin do. Gets rid of his opponents in the Moscow city elections a couple of years ago. That's the kind of thing that we got to call the Democrats on, and basically be the strongest pro-democracy fight here. The Democrats, this is the month they got to do it. In the next couple of weeks, they got to get rid of the filibuster and get these voting rights laws passed, or they're handing power over to the Republicans. And if they do that, they're not worth, they can't get anything done. So I think it's another reason they don't like us, because we're their conscience. We call them out on that nonsense. And this is something they have the power to do something about. And they sure as hell better do it, or the rest of us should be mad as hell and really, take up this pro-democracy mantle and make it an issue that cannot be ignored. Mr. Anderson asks, long-term solutions to bringing spending under control on the military. Start electing Greens. I mean, we got to build that from the bottom up, but, there is a small group of progressive Democrats that, put up resolutions like cutting the military budget 10%, nowhere near support. Some of the people in the House and Senate Armed Service Committees who voted for the increase in military spending are members of the Progressive Caucus. It's just not an issue in the Democratic Party. It's been focused on domestic issues and military spending. And then there's the buildup of, this new generation of nuclear weapons, which is a real threat to peace, security, and survival. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight because of this modernization of nuclear weapons, which puts them on hair trigger alert with hypersonic missiles that are 6 times faster than the old ones, military doctrines that say we can use them in tactical nuclear weapons under a crazy idea to escalate, to de-escalate. Both the Americans and the Russians have that. So if you're losing a conventional war, you use tactical nukes to quote unquote escalate to de-escalate, which is not going to happen. Once those nukes fly, they all fly. It's called the doomsday machine. That's what Daniel Ellsberg explained in his book called The Doomsday Machine. So, and we need a peace movement, a broad peace movement, not a sectarian peace movement, which we seem to have right now that takes strange positions on international questions, like there's no suppression of rights in Hong Kong. The Uyghurs are just fine, etc. People don't want to hear that. They want to take on the U.S. military-industrial complex and not get involved in geopolitical positioning with authoritarian governments. So the peace movement's got to be built and focus on what we can build a mass movement around. And military spending could be one of those things, because it's not hard to explain to people how these 800 foreign military bases, these 12 shooting wars we're involved in, all this counterterrorism activity that ends up killing civilians instead of terrorists and creating more terrorists, all that is not about protecting us, regular folks. It's about making the world safe for giant corporations to profit from cheap labor and easy access to resources and deregulated markets that don't have environmental and worker safety protections. It's not hard to explain to people. And I think it's actually one of the tougher issues when you do public opinion polling and look at progressive positions. Military spending cuts rarely has a majority support. So we have work to do there. You asked about long-term solutions. I think the long-term solution is we need to organize, and Green candidates need to make that an issue, even when they're running for municipal office. There was a mayor's, National Conference of Mayors or somebody called for cuts in military spending. If your city isn't part of that and you're running for city council, you can make that an issue. So there are a lot of ways to do that. And it's vitally important because we're squandering a lot of resources on the military. And instead of building peace and security and protecting our climate, we're fighting all these wars that aren't about protecting us here in the homeland. Eric Gray, Howie, if you were a teacher, what would be your message to specifically high school students about the current world we live in? What I'm hearing from high school students is they want action on climate. And my message to them would be, you can make a difference. We made a difference as high school students during the Vietnam War, during the Civil Rights Movement, during the anti-nuclear movement. And don't underestimate, when I talk to high school students, a lot of times they are better informed than people that got college degrees I guess, are just too busy in life to really get the details straight. Whereas these high school students, and I've been on a lot of Zoom calls with them, I really know what they're talking about. So I would encourage them to not underestimate their capacity to understand what's going on and to be a voice. And hopefully there's Green Party with a youth wing that they can get involved in, but there are other movements like the Sunrise Movement that's mobilizing them. And while I disagree with Sunrise's reliance and they're counting on the Democrats who are not going to come through for them. But the fact that they're out there raising their voice is good. So that would be my message to high school students. If you're worried about the climate or other issues like, can you afford college without going deeply into debt? COVID, whatever it is, your voice can be heard and your knowledge can be shared. Kenneth O'Connor, how can we break through the media blackout of Greens and other leftists? What can we do to become part of the national dialogue? Do we even need the corporate media to pay attention to us? Yeah, this question comes up all the time. And I think we have to go underneath the national media for the most part. We've got to be in our communities at the grassroots level, organizing, talking to people one-on-one, getting our message out that way. Social media enhances that. But corporate media, they black out. It's not just the Greens. They black out the whole question of military spending. They blacked out the question of this drone strike against this guy that was working with the U.S. for years. And we wiped out him and his family. That is so-called collateral damage. You don't see that being discussed in the corporate media. So that's just to say the Greens aren't alone. There's a lot of stuff the big media is just not covering. So I think we have to build an organization with our own social media presence, leaflets. And do we need the corporate media to pay attention to us? In the end, yes. And they will do that when we start winning elections at the state house in states and then at the national level in Congress. And then it'll be impossible to ignore us because we will have a platform and we will be something new and people will want to know what we have to say. And in the end, the corporate media got to deliver on what people want to hear because they're trying to sell ads. And if they don't, people are going to turn to another channel. So we should keep putting out our media releases to the corporate media, develop relationships with journalists that are interested in what we have to say, and we will get some coverage. But until we are a bigger, stronger force, we're not going to get coverage. So I think in the end, it's back to us. We got to build this Green Party to the point where it cannot be ignored. Z. Kramer, what do you think the correct reaction to 9/11 should have been? Well, it's what I was saying earlier. The Green Party and the Socialist Party said at the time, it should have been, and we had a lot of goodwill from around the world, it should have been an international criminal investigation and prosecution, not a war that the U.S. Led to Afghanistan and then expanded to Iraq with plans to go to a whole lot of other countries. That was the wrong reaction, and both the Green Party and the Socialist Party warned about that at the time. And I pointed out that the Brown University Group estimates $8 trillion. The National Priority Project emphasizes $21 trillion spent on this war on terror, which has not reduced the number of terrorists out there because we keep hitting the wrong people, creates collateral damage, and more people want to get back at us, what we call terrorists. So should have been a criminal prosecution of that crime against humanity, not a war and occupation of countries in the Middle East. Z. Kramer asks, what should Biden be doing to handle the spike in COVID cases? Well, requiring employers above a certain size to have their employees vaccinated. I mean, all the things he called for on Thursday, I think were good steps. And, it's about time these Republicans, as I called them earlier, are a death cult, these governors. Children are going back to school and they don't want masks, they don't want vaccines. They call that freedom. This is freedom to make other people sick. That is not, that's not a civil liberty. That's not a freedom. That's just, I don't know what it is. It's meanness. It's trying to hurt people. So that's a bunch of nonsense. Somebody's knocking on my window, but I'll just keep going here. Amy Sachs, Hawkins is correct. We have another person. L. Judister Stir. Hello, sir. With regard to 9/11 and its aftermath, is it your position that the perpetrators of the war on terror, for example, Bush, Cheney, etc., be brought to justice for their war crimes? If not, why? Yeah, they should be brought to justice. And the problem is we're not part of the International Criminal Justice Court, whatever its formal name is. And so it doesn't have jurisdiction. And the Democrats, when they're in power, like Obama said, we're not going to look back. Biden is not going to look back. So it's not going to happen. There are prosecutors, there are courts where you have universal jurisdiction with respect to war crimes. So there are countries, particularly prosecutors in Spain, that will nab Bush or Cheney if they go to Spain. So there's some action on that front, but I wouldn't hold my breath looking for them to be brought to justice. Garrett Brown. Howie, can the Greens pick up enough local and state seats in 2022 to help them with better ballot access in 2024? It varies by state. And I got people out there that I got to deal with this. Hold on a sec.
Hi, my name is Doreen. How you doing?
My apologies. Sometimes things happen on the street that you got to deal with. Okay. Can the Greens pick up enough local and state seats in 2022 to help them deal with better ballot access in 2024? It depends on the state. Like here in New York, we can get ballot access by getting enough votes for our governor, lieutenant governor ticket. It just varies from state by state. Local races don't help you get a state ballot line, but they do help you build your base of support. So it varies by state. And I guess that's the best I can answer that. You got to look at your own state situation. But we need to run candidates so people know we're out there and know what we're talking about. And that's, when we have enough support, depends on the state. It varies from 0.5% in New Mexico to 20% in Alabama. How many votes you need in a statewide race to get a ballot line. So, like I said, it varies state by state, but running candidates for local and state office can get us ballot lines. So when we run for president in 2024, we got a head start. We got more ballot lines, so we don't have to petition in so many states. Scout Trooper 164. What can be done to ensure that another 9/11 doesn't happen again and be used as an excuse to start a never-ending war? Well, I think that the intelligence operation of the United States is pretty good now in finding out if anybody is planning to do the kind of thing that was done on 9/11. What we're more likely to suffer from are people that are not formally connected to a terrorist organization but are inspired by one, and that's where we get these, lone wolf attacks, and that's a problem. And because most of those have been lone wolf attacks, we haven't used it as an excuse to go to war, but we are at war across northern Africa and down the east side of Africa with AFRICOM, a lot of counterterrorism stuff, as well as the Middle East. And I think those are largely counterproductive because we often, with those drone strikes, get innocent people. And when U.S. military is in other countries, most of the people that are terrorists, this includes Taliban, there's been studies of this, they aren't so much into the Islamist ideology as just getting the foreigners out of their country. And a lot of the movements that we call Islamist terrorists are actually people who may be Islamic, but their main beef is with their own corrupt local governments. And that's what they're fighting. And we call that, terrorism that might affect us. Maybe we should be having stronger anti-corruption relationships in these countries. And Afghanistan was a good example of that because we looked the other way at all kinds of corruption. Our own contractors were corrupt. And, as people began to figure out what was going on, different factions of people in Afghanistan who had beef with each other were calling in drone strikes on the people they had beef with, which had nothing to do with terrorism, it had to do with their local politics. And we got played. And so, we give money to people that said they'd be on our side, and they'd pocket the money and, then maybe have new relationships down the road, which Anand Gopal wrote a great book about that because he embedded himself with the Taliban and really figured out what was going on. And I'm forgetting the name of it. But I'm not so worried about a big strike like, 9/11 was. And I just think we got to stop this war on terror, which is creating more terrorism. Be the world's humanitarian superpower. Help people with, sewage, sanitation, clean water, schools, healthcare, and helping them build a green energy system so they can leap right out of the fossil fuel age into the solar age of the 21st century. People will appreciate that and see us as friends instead of a military that, the Pew Foundation did a survey recently and asked people around the world, what country do they fear will undermine democracy in their own country the most? It was the United States. It wasn't authoritarian countries like China or Russia. It was the United States because we militarily intervene all over the world and get involved in these stupid wars and relationships with corrupt people like the people that was running the governments in Afghanistan. Vicky Corden, what is the best way to handle people who are into conspiracy theories? Example, Trump back in power with the military. I'm not sure I get the example, but conspiracist thinking. There are conspiracies, but the idea that some people find a conspiracy to explain everything. They don't have a class analysis. They don't have a power structure analysis. It's always a few bad people doing some devious things in the background. And the assumption is you get rid of those few people and everything will be all right. So it's not a systematic analysis. And conspiracy thinking historically, that's been the thing on the right. That's been, just take post-World War II, the communist conspiracy that Joe McCarthy spun into, a bunch of stuff he had no evidence for. The John Birch Society, which kind of carried that on in crazy extremes, but was an important part of the Republican Party, right down to today where, vaccines are a corporate conspiracy and, masking is the cutting edge of setting up an authoritarian state. This kind of thinking, and then you got people like that woman in Georgia, Marjorie Greene Taylor, that the forest fires in California were started by a Jewish laser beam from a satellite or something. I mean, this stuff gets really crazy. Unfortunately, there are people on the left that can buy into that mentality. I think we particularly had that after 9/11 and the idea that it was an inside job, that Bush and Cheney set up in order to justify the wars. And when you start thinking that way, and ignoring a lot of evidence that disprove that, pretty soon you're not really looking at reality and you're looking for conspiracies. So the best way to handle people, I think you present the evidence. I think sometimes ridicule and humor may shake some of them out of their positions. But the main thing is to build a movement that's based on, is reality based. So the conspiracists are marginalized. I guess the Trump back in power with the military is the idea that, in August they were going to come back, but that didn't happen. Scout Trooper 164, Howie Hawkins. What is your reply to non-politicians such as Secular Talk, who don't believe that running third party is very effective or could have caused Nina Turner to lose her election? Now, it's the first I've heard that Nina Turner lost her election because of a third party. I don't know who Secular Talk is, but I'm sure they are like many people that say third party is not effective. Third parties raise issues that the major parties won't raise. It's been their historical role, whether it was abolition with the Liberty Party in 1840 and its evolution through free soil and the Republican Party, the money question and monopoly and other social and economic justice questions that Greenback, Labor, and People's Party or the populist movement raised, or the social insurance programs and the question of public ownership of utilities, the so-called sewer socialists that the Socialist Party raised in the early part of the 20th century, or the issues that we've raised, the Green New Deal. We put that on the agenda, the Green Party. We are the voice for cutting the military budget and having a peace policy. We're the voice for Medicare for all. I mean, the damn Democrats, even, Pramila Jayapal, when she introduced her single-payer health care bill, at the press conference, she said she's with Bernie to lower the age to 60. She undermined her own bill, which was for universal Medicare for all. So that's why we need the Green Party. We put issues on the table that are ignored. And to say that a third party caused Nina Turner to lose her election, I guess that's the smear that the winner used, that she didn't vote for Hillary and did talk to Jill Stein about being the vice presidential candidate. No, Secular Talk means if Nina ran as a third party, she would have much lower polling and would have lost by a long shot. That's a counterfactual. maybe she would have caught attention. Maybe a lot of people in that district, which is majority Democrat, would say, it's about time. Let's have another voice in there. Instead of Nina Turner going into the Democratic Party and all the baggage that comes with it. So it is tough running third party under our winner-take-all single-member district system. And that is why I keep saying we've got to take that head on right now, because until we change that, we are going to be marginalized with the Republicans being so extremist now. Most progressive-minded people are going to settle for the Democrats, even though they like the Green Party. And we got to change the incentives in the electoral system that create that problem for us. Eric Gray, what is your advice for teaching students about class analysis and consciousness, as well as power structure? Well, if I was going to do a class on that, I would go to the curriculum of the freedom schools of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Project, or Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. And in those schools, they had a curriculum that, it had basic literacy, numeracy, Black history, but also power structure analysis. And they were explaining to people, like, in those southern counties, who's the power structure? The sheriff, the plantation owners, the bankers, and did an analysis and discussion of that. I would say, try to do the same thing and have the students look at their county or their city and get real concrete about it. And then, discussions, what gives people power? Why does, in a lot of cities, the real estate industry has so much power? And why are they so interested in city government? That's where I would start. Mr. Anderson, what is your opinion on a 4-day work week? I think it's a good idea. I think we should have a program of reducing hours while maintaining pay. And that would require setting up a fund, like a social dividend fund, with a tax, so that the government would pay the difference between a 4 and a 5-day work week, or a 30 and 40-hour work week, rather than the employer, which would be give some employers the advantages over others. And so it has to be a socialized coverage of that lower income. But I think, that's been around. Andre Gortz wrote a lot about that in the late 90s. It's an idea that goes back to the 1930s. Hugo Black, before he became a Supreme Court justice, was a senator from Alabama, I believe, and proposed that kind of program. And it's what goes back to a early German Green slogan when they had their first economic program. And it said, we want a fair distribution of work and income, which meant as we become more productive, more automated, need less time to produce what we need, we should share the work and share the product of that work, the income, in a fair way, an equitable way. So I think that's a good idea, 4-day work week. Another question from Mr. Anderson. Howie, short-term expanding affordable housing or more community land trusts? I don't see those as either or. I do think we need to expand public housing radically. Our proposal in our Eco-Socialist Green New Deal was to build 25 million new units over 10 years in order to provide everybody with an affordable option, and to have it be not just for low-income people, but for middle-income professionals, blue-collar working-class people, as well as low-income people. So we begin to desegregate our society by race and class. And public housing can do that. Community land trusts are a way to put existing properties or new properties in a place where rising land values don't price people out of their own neighborhoods. And that's a good thing to set up. They require a lot of work. And from what I've observed, not all of them really engage the members and become staff dependent, but that's a problem with a lot of nonprofits. So it's a good institution. It just, you got to work at it to make sure that people participate. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, what do you think is the biggest reason why Congress does little to help out the people? Corruption, the filibuster, the people in office. They are beholden to their donors more than their voters. And unless the voters are mobilized, they're listening to the donors. And that's why the filibuster is there, because the big donors want that. We've got the documentation on that with Joe Manchin. And he was hobnobbing with business people that want to keep the filibuster, which means keep the kind of progressive social and economic programs from passing. And the legalized bribery of private campaign financing, I believe, is corruption. So that holds. And that's the people we got in office, the best politicians that money can buy for the most part. So I think you answered your own question. Jacob Church, what are some books you believe every student should read in college? Oh, man. Well, coming to mind right now is, some key writings from Karl Marx. I think John Stuart Mill, to get a more sort of liberal, socialistic take on political economy. I think, books that I've found dealing with the contemporary American scene are definitely worth reading are Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert L. Allen, which talks about how the Ford Foundation came in and co-opted the Black Power movement. Earliest example of how the military-industrial complex has tamed a lot of social movements. Another book by Mike Davis called, Prisoners of the American Dream, I believe, which is a good history of working class politics in this country and why it's been so hard to form an independent workers' party. So that's in history. I mean, you asked for some books. I'd read Murray Bookchin. I don't know how many college curriculums it's on, but I think post-scarcity anarchism really was prescient and gives you the spirit of the 60s at their best. And then he's got more academic, scholarly kind of work like The Ecology of Freedom, which is a history of hierarchy and domination, as well as class exploitation, and Urbanization Without Cities, which is a history of the city as the potential ground for a free society based on citizen assemblies. There's a whole literature there. So those are some books I would recommend people read. Z. Kramer, should we move Labor Day to May 1st? Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like having two holidays. You know what happened is May 1st was called for by the people around the world on the left who wanted to commemorate the Haymarket martyrs. A Haymarket in Chicago where 8 people were convicted of and sentenced to death. 4 of them actually hung at the end of a demonstration for the 8-hour day, there was an explosion. And really didn't tie it to those 8 people. The police might have done it as a provocation. We just don't really know. But that was called to commemorate them and to push for the 8-hour day and labor rights. And then Grover Cleveland, as president, sort of set up an alternative to that in the 90s called Labor Day in September. And that's a tamer event. It is a formal holiday. So I kind of like celebrating both. We need to think about labor twice a year. But we shouldn't forget May 1st. That's the original and the radical Labor Day. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, what are your thoughts on Thanksgiving? Should it still be celebrated or condemned for the events that followed afterwards? Yeah, I guess the events you're referring to are the displacement and genocide toward the Indians, with whom the Pilgrims had a Thanksgiving dinner. Uh, I think you want to give thanks to what nature's bounty is. I think you have to put it in historical context. So I think it should be celebrated in context, not just condemned. That's kind of sour grapes. People, they like that 4-day holiday. Might as well make it a positive lesson rather than, sitting outside saying y'all are, not virtuous. So I would celebrate it with, reflections on what it means, what we're thinking, how the history of it, and how we can make amends for some of the problems with that history. Ricky Justiniano, how would the Green Party handle vaccine mandates? Well, I think we should support them. I mean, the idea that we have mandates to take vaccines before you go to school, mandates before you can get into another country. I mean, what's the big effing deal? This is a public health measure, not an oppression. That's just crazy Republican death cult talk. So we should support them. I'm waiting for a question. I may pick one off the screen here. Okay, somebody says it's against our personal rights to have vaccine mandates. Some people don't want chemicals in our bodies that aren't fully researched. Jesus, we got so much evidence that the COVID vaccine is safe and effective. I don't know how you can say it's not fully researched. And yeah, you don't have to take a vaccine, but that means you can't go to school. You can't go to work. You're free to do that, but we're free to protect ourselves from you who might carry COVID and make us sick to the point where we might die. Here we go. Scout Trooper 164, Howie Hawkins, what do you think Congress should be doing? Well, the Senate should get rid of the filibuster, pass the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the PRO Act, the Equality Act, DC statehood. I mean, there's a whole list of reforms that have passed the House, should pass the Senate. And so that's what they should be doing. It's all about the filibuster. So Congress should be putting the screws to Manchin and Sinema and any other senator that's holding back on the filibuster. And there are some. The Washington Post, as I pointed out before, been sort of keeping a running record on where these senators are. And some of them are talking out of both sides of their mouth. It's not just Manchin and Sinema. So that's what Congress should be doing. And this is the month where they got to do it. They got to get the debt ceiling dealt with by the end of the month. They got the budget to finish. They got the reconciliation bill to finish. They got the bipartisan infrastructure bill to pass. They got a lot on their plate. And unfortunately, I'm afraid the voting rights and these other reforms, the filibuster is going to block it all. And so the Democrats, forget the Republicans. The Democrats are negotiating with themselves on this. And they better get their act together, or we're all in trouble. And, the Green Party is just going to have to redouble our efforts to get ourselves strong enough that we can get in there, because Democrats can't get it done. Violet Content Boutique. Howie, are the city council and state legislature the ones to establish ranked choice voting and popular national vote? Well, we can establish at city council and state legislative level ranked choice voting. For those legislative bodies, we really want multi-seat ranked choice voting, also called the single transferable vote, because that creates proportional representation. So if you're in a 9-member district, 10% is the winning threshold. That means for every 10% your party's candidates get, they get a seat. And that would create a multi-party democracy, including the Green Party. And that's what we should be pushing for at city council and state legislative level, as well as Congress. There's a Fair Representation Act. We should be pushing, particularly those so-called progressive Democrats, to become co-sponsors of that bill. It only has a few co-sponsors, and most of the progressive Democrats are not sponsoring it. So that's an issue. If you're a Green running for Congress, you can raise with your opponents. Now, the national popular vote, there is a pact that I think we're at around 200 out of 270 votes, electoral votes, where states have said, we will go with the popular vote nationally when enough states have signed on that they will do the same thing, so that 270 electoral votes, which are needed to win the presidency, are part of that pool of votes. So that's something that state legislatures can do. You can look up the National Popular Vote Initiative, and you can see where your state is on that, and encourage your state to do that. And that would create a national popular vote. Now, what we in the Green Party want is a ranked choice national popular vote. And we could do that with legislation in Congress. Doesn't require a constitutional amendment. And this is all laid out in an article coming out soon in the Harvard Law and Policy Review by Rob Ritchie of Fair Vote and some lawyers he worked with. So look for that. The actual text of that draft bill is in the article in the Harvard Policy and Law Review. And that's how we get a ranked choice national popular vote. And the scenario that article lays out does use the National Popular Vote Initiative, and it has another initiative to go to ranked choice. So look for that. And in the meantime, work on your city and state to get multi-seat ranked choice voting for proportional representation in your legislative bodies. Andrew Hager, I realize this has nothing to do with Medicare, but what are your thoughts on the use of biomass to power cars and locomotives, steam and diesel alike? I'm not big on biomass because it releases carbon into the atmosphere. Theoretically, it cycles the carbon, but to grow the biomass requires plantation agriculture, which is bad for the soil, monocrops. It's just not a good answer when we've got solar electrification, wind electrification, geothermal electrification, tidal wave power, small scale hydro. We can electrify transportation. We don't need biomass. That just keeps us in the carbon age. There are niche uses of biomass, on farms, maybe for airlines, unless we can find another fuel. But to power the whole transportation system, no. We got better options. Electrify with solar and wind primarily. What are your thoughts on creating a federal position for Indigenous representation to help increase Indigenous people's voices being heard? I think that's something that should be explored, given the history of this country, who was here first, and the fact that a number of countries, New Zealand and others, have legislative bodies set aside for Indigenous people. I believe the Sami in the Arctic Circle of Sweden, Norway, Finland have their own legislative seats. The Maori in New Zealand do. I think that's a good idea. And I haven't worked out or seen a model for the details, but um, I think we ought to expand the number of people in our Congress. Is just, what they represent now, almost 800,000 people apiece. That's too many. We can have most national legislatures around the world are bigger than ours. Most city councils and state or provincial legislatures have many more than ours do in this country. So I think we can add seats and make sure Indigenous people have some guaranteed seats so their voices are heard and their concerns are taken into account. Well, it's been an hour, so I guess there's no question because it's time to stop. Now, I am going to be back on a Zoom call to talk about socialism in the 21st century. This is put on by the Greens and the Peace and Freedom Party and DSA in the San Francisco Bay Area. But it's open to everybody. And I'm going to put the link here in the chat. And my people already did it. So you got the link there at 4:02 p.m. And so you're welcome to come. And I got 4 or 5 points I'm going to make. I have 15 minutes to do it. Then we'll have discussion. In 5 minutes to wrap up, I'm doing it with Marsha Fineland from the Peace and Freedom Party, California. And if I remember the name, Helen Chen from DSA in Oakland. So that should be an interesting discussion. And you're welcome to join that. And other than that, I guess my concern is these children getting sick from COVID. And now that we got the mandates, let's support that and protect the children because, what a shame that we got children that don't need to dying from COVID now. And that's just got to stop. So that's it for this week. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next week.